Welcome back. All right. Officiating. There's always this discussion. I've never talked that I can remember about officiating during a Stanley Cup final. And that's what this is about today. So this is not about getting into all of the calls and what they mean and what they are and all that. It is more just about which ones do or don't get called during the Stanley Cup final. And then we'd have the debate about whether or not they should. And I've talked before about how I think that calling the rule book is the way to go. But as we get into the Stanley Cup final, there will be plenty of people who actually say, you know what? I'm okay with them putting the whistles away in the second and third period. I'm okay with them not calling anything if they don't have to. And so there's definitely a discussion to be had. The one question I have is a simple one. So if it makes the hockey better, not calling some of these ticky-tack penalties that might get called during the regular season, why do we call them during the regular season? So if it's not a penalty now, maybe it shouldn't be a penalty in October. Maybe it would make the regular season hockey better. And if the answer is, well, no, that wouldn't work, it's weird because you have two different games. You have regular season hockey and playoff hockey. So we'll go through this. Most of them are in alphabetical order. I tried to get most of the ones that we see most often. I tried to leave out the ones that aren't that often, and I added a few as well because they can lead to game misconducts and that kind of thing, although they're rare. Like, for instance, biting. I didn't put biting on the board because we really don't see that very often. So, at the top, we have abusive officials. We saw this earlier in the playoffs where I believe it was Marchment that contacted an official with a stick, and it was not violent, it wasn't brutal or anything, and nothing came out of it. But you can also get abusive officials for language. You can be assessed that penalty. I don't think it gets called as often as it could, but I'm not going to say that that's one. I would say, yeah, it depends. So do we call that a 50-50? I have no idea. Making this up as I go. Depends on situation. See, right there. Call it by the book? Nope, I have violated that on the first roll. All right. Boarding. Boarding doesn't get called as often as I think it could, but anytime there's a boarding call, there will automatically be fans saying he turned at the last moment. He's supposed to keep his head up. Well, he turned his back to the play, so what does he expect to happen? Boarding doesn't get called as often during the playoffs as it feels like it gets called during the regular season. But if there's a scoring play coming out of it, boarding is going to get called. And so it should be called. Always. It's a dangerous play. There are instances where, yes, a player turns at the last moment, or the person delivering the hit, probably in combination with the guy turning towards the boards at the last moment, didn't really have a chance not to throw a hit from behind that boards the guy. That's why I don't have a legal check from behind on the board, because to me, boarding and a legal check from behind, very, very similar to one another. So I'll just say both of them, yes, should be called. Charging, charging doesn't get called nearly as much as it feels like it used to. It feels like charging was a pretty common penalty when I started watching hockey, and now it really doesn't get called. Part of this is probably the fact that we don't have enforcers in the game like we did, and enforcers were far more likely to charge across the ice and just, drill somebody down onto the surface, and so it doesn't get called as often. And then there's the debate when it does get called about, well, was that enough strides? Was that, just it's a regular hockey play, it's a regular hit, but they called it a charge because they don't like my team. Charging doesn't get called very often. Cross-checking does not get called in the Stanley Cup final the way it does during the regular season. And I'm bewildered. There was a Dallas-Edmonton game, and there were various cross-checks being thrown right in front of the camera, right in the corner, mostly by Dallas. Being honest, most of it's by Dallas. There were a couple there by Edmonton as well in retaliation, and nothing. Referees right there, and it's fine. And these are two-handed cross-checks to the upper back of the net kind of. Nope, that's fine. So there's been that discussion about cross-checking throughout the playoffs, but that bar rises, and it has to be frustrating for some, not for all, but it has to be frustrating to some players that they take these vicious cross-checks and they're not called, and then if the puck goes over the glass, we'll talk about it. Because delay games next, you have to call this 100% of the time. And the reason being, and the reason why I wanted to talk about this in a video is, because sometimes the comments can come across as snarky and sarcastic and whatnot, when it's not necessarily intended. I'm just blunt a lot of the time. But delay a game you have to call, and you can't have it a judgment call. You can't have an official going, I don't think he meant to put that over the glass. I think that you have to have that in the game, because before we had the delay game penalty, there was definitely a problem with players just throwing it over the glass to get a whistle. Very often defensive teams are pinned down and they throw the puck over the glass to get a whistle, to get a line change. And I think the delay game penalty has to be called at all times. As long as it's the right call, and they're allowed to challenge for if they think it wasn't directly over the glass, and get that penalty rescinded. You cannot do it the other way, though, where if you think it was a delay of game and they didn't call it that way, you can't challenge to get the penalty, but you can challenge it if it's called a penalty. So you have to call that. Diving, embellishment, I think, honestly, there's instances where it gets called and I don't understand. But I'll say in the Stanley Cup final, I don't think this is getting called either. Not like it was during the regular season. And I'm saying this based on the last round as well. It feels like the standard is maybe a little bit higher when it comes to the embellishment side, because the standard's higher for the other penalties as well. So there have been times where I'm like, yeah, that player might have been called for a dive there if it was in November, but now we're into, the May-June part of the season, and it's no longer a penalty. Elbowing, we don't see that very often. Elbowing used to be more common than it is now, so we really don't see it getting called as often. Like when I see somebody saying, oh, there's a sneaky elbow being thrown in there by so-and-so, and I'm thinking, man, these people watched hockey from back in the especially late 90s. The amount of times that a player would throw like a sneaky dirty hit or an elbow, and yeah, there was a lot of it. It was a much different game back then than it is now. Fighting/roughing. I'm going to put a question mark here for a simple reason. I'm not sure how many punches it takes before it's qualified as a fight. And during the playoffs, it feels like it gets higher for even a roughing penalty. Where I'll see somebody just straight and gloved, but they punch the other player right in the face, and nothing. The other player might punch them back, nothing. And during the regular season, yeah, those guys are both going to the box. And it is interesting to watch that. So, with fighting, roughing, the question I've always had is there's times where guys will throw a bunch of punches and it's 2 minutes each for roughing, which makes it 4-on-4. And other times where it seems like they throw less punches, but the referee calls it a fight, so it stays 5-on-5 for that 5 minutes. So it definitely makes a difference to the game as to whether you call it a rough or you call it an actual fight. Goalie interference doesn't get called very much anyways. Basically, at this point in time, goalie interference is more of the taking a goal off the board than an actual penalty. Very rare you see the goalie interference. It has been called, absolutely has been called in these playoffs. But in this final, that bar is going to be pretty high as well. So goal interference doesn't get called that much. I'm only talking about the penalty. I'm not talking about goals getting taken off the board or being allowed to stand or anything like that. High sticking, you have to call high sticking. The interesting thing with high sticking is that if it's a follow-through, then it's not a penalty. The funny part to me is that if you contact the puck and then on your follow-through you hit a guy in the face, it's not a penalty. If you miss the puck and hit the guy in the face, I should say, it is a penalty, meaning you got 2 minutes because you missed the puck. I'm fine with that. I do find it interesting. There are times too where a guy gets cut with a follow through, and so it would be 4 minutes if it was on the wind up, but since it's on the follow through, no penalty. Play on, keep going. It does throw off fans at times, especially newer fans, I believe. But it's always been called that way. Holding? I don't see holding getting called. Holding the stick? Nah. Last night's game, there were instances of both that just nothing. And it's the Stanley Cup final. But how many games during the regular season do we see these getting called? And we'll look and go, I guess that's the hold. He kind of grabs the jersey there a little bit. Kind of grabbed the back of the jersey a little bit. I guess that's the hold. Whereas now you can kind of horse collar somebody. And it's like, well, I mean, it's the final, so what are you going to do? Hooking, if it's a scoring play. So, and that would apply to some of these as well. So, if a penalty takes place where it's going to lead to a scoring chance, that's when you call it. Hooking, if you're hooking a player who's trying to get to the front of the net and they've got a clear path, you're going to get called. If it's hooking, you're in their zone and it's just a little hook, it may not get called. So it depends. Sometimes it's a penalty and sometimes it's not. Illegal check to the head does not get called as often as I think it should. But we don't really see that much in the final. For all of the talk about teams being really dirty that get to the final, Florida gets called dirty often. I get it on some level, but we don't see illegal checks to the head once you reach this point of the playoffs. It's really, really not needed. Instigator, well, we don't get fighting in the final, so we don't really need to talk about the instigator. A rule that I would do away with if I had a say in it. Interference does get called, same as hooking. If it's a scoring play, you're going to get that call. That's just how that works. And interference gets called as well if a team is on a 3-on-2 rush and one of the defensemen stands up one of the forwards at the blue line and knocks him down, and he's not the one carrying the puck, you're very likely going to get an interference call there. Notice I'm saying very likely, not that it's 100% guaranteed, because that one can kind of be up for debate as well. Kneeing, we shouldn't see kneeing in the final. No reason I should necessarily have to talk about kneeing. Kneeing's dangerous. Don't do it. I think it's dangerous for the player throwing the knee as well. Not as dangerous as the player receiving it, but just don't do it. Just a lot of the time, too, kneeing is a slower player getting passed by a faster player, and the last thing that they can do is stick their knee out to try to stop them from getting past them. They realize that they're beaten, and so they just stick their knee out. It's reckless, it's dangerous, and it's stupid. Slew foots generally don't get called. I mean, and a lot of the time, too, tripping can be called a slew foot. So I always find it interesting how a referee will say 2 minutes for tripping, and then we'll see Department of Player Safety come out and say, this is a slew foot. So it's normally tripping that we may see as a slew foot. And again, if it's a scoring play, you're getting that call. You get the tripping call if it's a scoring play, usually. I really wish I didn't have to say usually. Just there are definitely instances where you may not get it. But tripping, too, there's times where a player might trip himself. The referee's point of view, it looks like somebody else has caused that, and they make the call. Too many men on the ice. This is one of those ones. We've talked about this on the channel before. It does get called, so I've got the check mark there. It should get called, but there's, I think, an argument to be made that you could put a line on the ice where players can be there making line changes, and it doesn't qualify as a too many men. Basically, the linesmen make this call most of the time, and I think it's 5 feet from the bench they give you, where, as long as the guy who's leaving the ice, if he's within 5 feet of the bench and the guy coming onto the ice plays the puck, that's where you're going to get that too many men on the ice call, even within that 5 feet rule. But I think there's definitely some allowance that could be in there, because we do see times where there's 7 or 8 guys on the ice because there's a line change going on. They're hurrying to get that line change done. And so technically they have too many men on the ice, but they're all within that small area. The puck doesn't go near them, or the puck goes by them and they don't touch it, so they don't get that call. We've already seen that in the last week. I know there's been a couple instances of player A doesn't touch the puck because they're leaving the ice, and their replacement's already on the ice, so they know if they touch it, they're going to get that too many men on the ice call. And that kind of has to be consistent that way. Unsportsmanlike conduct, I would put that under like the abusive officials kind of side of things, in that it does get called. It feels like the unsportsmanlike conduct gets called a lot when it is late in the game and it's a blowout. And if it's a blowout, they are far more likely to call unsportsmanlike conduct. So that player who maybe was cursing and swearing at the official in the first period, and the official turned his back and said, oh, whatever. In the third period, when that player starts it up again, they might point at the player and point off ice like, you are gone. 2 and 10. 2 minutes for unsportsmanlike, and then a 10-minute misconduct. Out of the game you go. It's only weird and a little bit awkward when they do that 2 and 10, and there's 13 and a half minutes left in the game. I know we saw that earlier in the playoffs. Slashing, I'm going to write it this way because this is the way they've called it for the last few years now. If it's on the hands, you get the call. Generally, if it's a slash to the hands, you get the call. If it's not, you don't. One way that slashing has been changed, and this kind of threw me when they started calling it this way, is when the player who's given the slashing penalty just taps the stick out of the hands of the player, whose stick is now gone because it was slashed out of their hands. But I'm old school that even playing street and floor hockey, there were times that I'd knock a stick out of somebody's hands because they weren't holding on to it. And I could see that like they were just kind of lazily holding onto it with one hand. Maybe the hand was half open. And I'd be like, should hold onto your stick a little better. There are times where I've watched games and I've seen a slash and the stick flies and I'm like, he wasn't even holding his stick. So, like, the player's just kind of lazily, one hand, hands kind of half open. Yeah, you knocked the stick out of his hands. What do you mean slashing? Hold your stick. The same people that are, always keep your head up, keep your head up. I'm the guy that's saying, hold on to your stick. I'm the one, too, that when a helmet is torn off, sometimes they get torn off kind of easily, and I'll be saying to the screen, maybe if you did your chin strap a little bit tighter, maybe if your visor wasn't so high up on top of your forehead, maybe that high stick wouldn't have got you where it got it. But that's how hockey players can be. It's sort of like the mouth guard. What does the mouth guard do when you're chewing on it, Matthew Tkachuk? I don't think it's helping your mouth. But hockey players are hockey players, and they will be hockey players. Clipping. Clipping can be a major. I've got this here because that's basically a low bridge. It's a low hit. We don't see that in the final anymore either. I'm saying anymore because there have definitely been some violent incidents in the Stanley Cup final in the past. But we really generally don't see that now. And I don't think we're going to see that these playoffs at all in this Stanley Cup final. Which brings you to headbutting. Headbutting obviously is a game misconduct. We don't get that in the Stanley Cup final because, although you should. So the X's and the check marks, you have to watch the video to understand exactly what I'm getting at with all of them. But yeah, headbutting we don't see, and I'm so grateful we don't see that in the game anymore. So that's my take on officiating, and I guess the question that I will throw out there again at the end of this video is the one that I put out near the start of this video. Would hockey be better served if you just call the book the same way from October to January where you're calling all the rules? Or should the regular season be called like the playoffs where certain penalties, you're not going to necessarily call them? It's sort of like during the regular season, if it's tied, there's 3 minutes left in the third period, that rule book gets a little bit thinner. Should the NHL just go ahead and double down on that, or is there still is it a good idea to have the rules just change during games and during the playoffs? For veteran fans of watching the game, like myself, that's what you get used to, and you sort of get just acclimated to that. But I understand for newer fans and for some veteran fans as well, they still don't like it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. I did not put all the penalties on the board. I didn't feel like they were all necessary. I wanted to cover the major ones and go into where they have to make those calls. So where I'll close out this way. The ones that I think you can't have any kind of gray area, they have to call them. Delay a game, you absolutely have to call delay a game. So I'll put another check mark. How does that sound? Yeah, this is going to be one of those ones if people fast forward to the end. I'm sorry. Fighting roughing, obviously you have to call. Yeah, well, no, actually. Playoffs? No, I'm just thinking it through going, no, you don't. High sticking, you have to be responsible for your stick. And I'll say, if there was an illegal check to the head, yes, you'd have to. And I can get better with my check marks here, can I? And then obviously some of the others too. But yeah, so let me know your thoughts. The NHL does have a very malleable rulebook as the year goes along. But thank you guys so much for all your support. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you could add another rule, would you add one? If you could take a rule away, would you take one away? Let me know your thoughts on that. Thanks again for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.